Many thanks for staying tuned. Well, insinuations abound that major oil marketers are to begin a direct purchase of premium motor spirit, popularly called petrol, from the Dangote Petroleum Refinery between today, Thursday, and next week, as the Nigerian National Petroleum Company Limited (NNPCL) pulls out as sole off-taker of the product from the $20 billion plant. Multiple sources from NNPC and the Major Energies Marketers Association of Nigeria confirmed on Tuesday that NNPCL was no longer the sole off-taker of Dangote Petrol, giving room for other players in the downstream to buy products directly from the Dangote Refinery. And this came as unconfirmed reports stated that the Nigerian Midstream and Downstream Petroleum Regulatory Authority had released new petrol prices which are higher than the current pump price in various locations nationwide. But this isn't our concern today. We want to begin understanding the implications of all of these even before it happens. And who is better to bring us these understandings if not a major player in the energy industry? Dr. Wisdom Enang. He joins us via Zoom. Hello, Dr. Enang. You're welcome on Niger Delta today.
Good afternoon, Doctor. Welcome. It's good to have you again on the show.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Well, there has been so many stories with the oil and gas sector. And of course, being an energy expert, I'm sure you can help us find answers to some of these issues, especially as the issue of the sole off-taker of products from the Dangote Refinery has been settled. And now we have marketers trooping in to get products directly from the Dangote Refinery. But let's begin by understanding, what does this mean for the Nigerian people?
All right. Thank you very much. I think before we can start, discussing what it means to the Nigerian people, I think the first and most important thing is to give context on a timeline basis to what has happened so far. And I think my starting point is going to be what the prices of PMS has been in recent times and what that meant from a subsidy payment perspective. So I'll give you some context. The landing cost of PMS in the last few months has always been between 1,150 and 1,250. Bear in mind, this has a lot to do with the price of crude and all the charges and the logistics that come into the country and the clearing costs. Now, when it was about 600 and something, what that meant is that we had quite a huge chunk of, at that point it was solely imported, the PMS. We had quite a huge chunk of, subsidy payments that was made by the NMPCL. And that was subsidy payments of at least 350 Naira was what we're looking at from the NNPCL per liter of every Nigerian's consumption. And then when you moved into just 3 days before the commencement of the Dangote Refinery startup, we saw what happened. The price point was moved narrowing, so like in a phasal manner, reducing the amount of subsidies. Right about that time is when the NNPCL said that, admitted that the $6.8 billion debt that was, kind of making rounds was actually true, that they owe to people from previous subsidy payments. So that at that point we saw the debt was now agreed, and the NNPCL made a concerted effort to begin to reduce the amount of subsidy. And then there was another price review that took the commodity to about 870 something in Lagos, and then of course another reduction in subsidy. But at that point, the NNPCL did tell us that they are still paying 133 Naira per liter on subsidy payment, even at that price. And then again, they came up with the monopsony deal. The monopsony deal, where they buy from the Dangote Refinery, get the benefits of economies of scale, and the benefits of being able to negotiate an imported deal if the Dangote Refinery is not ready to sell at a lower price, and then pass that on to Nigerians. And their plan was to still be able to pay the subsidy, which was about 133 Naira at that material point in time. And how did they do this? they wrote to the government and said, how do we absorb the subsidy? The government said, defray your royalties and taxes and use it to cover the subsidy payments. But the NNPCL has looked at it again and said, look, no matter what we defray, that is still not enough to pay for this subsidy. And so let's get out of that middle position. Let's allow market forces to play. And of course, let's not pay the subsidy anymore. And now we have seen the prices go to about 1,030 Naira in most parts of the country. Now, what is the expectation and what is the effect? First and foremost, I'd like to give some boundary condition. The first boundary condition is, let us understand that this pricing has not yet taken into account the effect of the benefits of the crude for Naira deal. The reason is because at this point in time, the PMS that we are currently consuming is not as a part of the crude for Naira deal. The crude has only been supplied recently to the Dangote Refinery, and we haven't got volumes churned out from that particular deal. What do I expect? In the nearest future, when that deal matures, and I mean in the next 2 months, we should be in a good position where, when that deal matures, we cut off the logistics costs, the middleman importation costs, all the forex undulations costs, and as well as the insurance cost. All of these constitute 25 to 30% of the overall price, and that should be able to be brought in and sent through to the various consumers. So what do I expect? I expect that when the crude for Naira deal comes, there will be a drop further, and that drop will absorb the subsidy that was already in existence, and then of course give us some knock-on benefits, and then we'll end up being at about a net position of about 850 Naira in the next 2 months if the crude for Naira deal is being implemented properly. And by that I mean if it's implemented in a way that we have the supply constant. Because if the supply is not constant and the refineries have to get to their foreign partners to import, we will still have the problem of having all the forex undulations and all the import factors that build up into the final price of the PMS and petroleum products for Nigerian consumers.
All right, Dr. Enang, bring us some understanding now. For a very long while now, we've continued to dwell on the issue of whether subsidy has been completely removed. But it's as if we can't really tell what is really happening in that aspect. Sometimes we hear it has been removed, sometimes we hear it is still being subsidized. What is really happening currently in terms of the removal of fuel subsidy? Can we say it has completely been removed now? So we know when we are buying fuel, at what price we're buying them at.
Savio, very fantastic question. You know, subsidy removal is based on certain boundary conditions, and those boundary conditions are primarily driven by the exchange rate. I mean, subsidy payments when it came to the importation. I'll give you context. When the president says subsidy is out, at that price, 595 Naira, at the exchange rate of about 800, truly subsidy was out. Because at that point, the price we're paying and the exchange rate meant that we were at that 595, we did not have any subsidy. But when the exchange rate began to slide from 800 to 1,700 at the moment, roughly, it means subsidy is back in. So what is the joker in the card? The joker in the card is the fact that the forex undulations is very tied to the Naira exchange rates. So when it comes to imported commodities, the question is, if we're selling imported commodities and we're selling at this price, I will tell you subsidy is still in, because the landing cost of fuel right now is 1,350 because our exchange rate is still sliding northwards. However, because it is being produced domestically now, I do imagine that we are able to get some level of economies of scale, including the additional benefit that will be gotten once we begin to do the crude for Naira deal. So if we're still consuming imported PMS, the answer is subsidy is still in, because subsidy at that point is directly correlated to the exchange rate. However, when we then begin to migrate majorly to the market dynamics of the domestic production, I'll tell you that at this price, there is no subsidy. But when the exchange rate slides further and the Dangote Refinery has to adjust their price, remember that even when we supply them crude Naira-based crude, the Dangote reinvestment was done in dollars, and they have to repay back investments in dollars. So it is normal for them to adjust their price based on the current the exchange rate at that material point in time, to be able to factor in the returns on their investments and the repayment of the loan. All of this is going to affect at that point if subsidies is still in or not. So if we keep the price constant and the the exchange rate slides to about 2,000, at that point, yes, subsidy is in. But if the price is here and the exchange rate remains the same or appreciates, subsidy is out.
So, Dr. Enang, if I get you clearly, as long as the exchange rate keeps inflating, we are always going to have issues of subsidy in the country.
Absolutely correct, sir.
Well, so what is really going to be the role right now of the NNPCL and indeed the government in ensuring that we maintain absolute stability in our foreign exchange, even if it's not stable, but at least to a reasonable extent where we don't have to bear the brunt this much?
Thank you very much. Yes, let's build a scenario, an economic scenario that looks at the fact that we are not importing anything, not feedstock, not any PMS. We are only focusing on the domestic consumption. So what's the joker in the card? The joker in the card is to keep the exchange rate relatively steady, so the Dangote Refinery do not have to increase their prices, and that way we can get the attendant benefits to us as individuals and consumers. Now, that being said, what does the NNPCL role now becomes after quitting the monopsony role is to make sure that they aggregate from the various fields and supply the various refineries the 450,000 barrels that has been earmarked for domestic refining. That is their role. Very short, very simple. If they can do that, we'll begin to have a crystallizing effect of the domestic refineries, sort of economies of scale and economic benefits begin to crystallize. That's the first thing. The government too needs to first and foremost look at how they can stabilize the FX market. There's a number of things that the government is trying, but I hate to say that we're reaching the potentials of some of those ideas. And so it's time to look at how we're going to handle special, FX interventions. But all of these, you have to understand that the mainstay of the Nigerian economy, 90% of the FX earnings comes from oil. And the sad part, it only contributes 15% to the GDP. And so the point is, we need to do two things. We need to bring in more volumes into production. We need to enhance our production. We need to do production enhancement. We need to curb crude oil theft. From the government's perspective, we need to put out fiscal incentives to attract more people. We need to reduce contracting cycles so that we get more oil fields in place and reach the 2 million barrels that we're looking at in 2025. At the same time, on the other side of the divide, the government now looks to look at, okay, how do we make sure that we also increase the GDP contribution of the oil? Because right now, the reason that we are only contributing 15% to our GDP from oil is because we're doing what we call rent seeking. We take the oil, we put the oil at the minimum spec required for international export, and we export it. And if we look at vis-a-vis our economic model with that of South Korea, it means that we are exporting labor out, because what South Korea does is they take our oil, they refine it, and then they make use of the 85% of the value chain, which includes the midstream, the downstream, and the gas sectors. They take advantage of that, and then they resell the refined oil to our energy consumption, which is going to directly reflect on our GDP. That's what the government needs to do. And as well, the government needs to also help us by putting all the tenets of energy security, which is energy affordability, energy availability, energy accessibility for the various options. I'll give you context. When in various households, you find out that people have either a solar generator or a solar panel or a solar inverter at home. And that is because people are beginning to migrate to solar as a more cost-effective source of energy. But when you look at the car options, the CNG is kind of there's a prerequisite for that, which is the infrastructure The infrastructure solves the availability and accessibility problem. Yes, so we have been able to say that the fuel equivalent in liters of CNG is about 230 Naira per liter of CNG equivalent if you normalize the energy content versus that of PMS, which is 1,030. Obviously, the benefits from a cost-benefit perspective has been established. Now, the question is it accessible? Is it also available? So this is what the government needs to do. Because why is that so? If we do what India has done, migrate a lot of their cars, almost 60% to CNG, the demand for a PMS fall already because of the increased price. Those people that had 4 cars do not see the need for 4 cars anymore. They're only having 2 or 1. And so the demand is going to fall. And when the demand shifts to the left, we then have the supply constant from the refinery output. What happens? The price equilibrium will obviously shift and the price will reduce. Okay. These are all what the government needs to do, both from a structural standpoint and from a policy standpoint.
Okay, Dr. Wisdom Enang. Now, this looks like a long-term plan. But let's look at the immediate plan, especially as the marketers will be trooping into Dangote Refinery to independently purchase the product. Now, people have also had to ask questions as to these marketers. Will they stick to the Nigerian market as against the issues we've always had to grapple with availability, and those available still sell to the international market? Are you, in your opinion, do you think our marketers will stick to the Nigerian market and sell to the Nigerian market specifically?
Thank you. I mean, when you're doing your risk assessment, it's you need to understand that we have 2 indicators: the probability of risk and the consequences of risk. So what you're giving to me is a high probability and a high consequence. The high probability of risk is because it has happened before. We have seen cross-border smuggling. The high consequence is that it would starve the Nigerians of the output. That of course the oil from Nigeria is being refined, but being sold for bigger in other parts of West Africa. So what you have is a very credible scenario. And on my risk radar, where we have it to happen, that in essence. But that is where we have the oversight function of the government. That is when the NMDPRA, which used to be formerly DPR, should set up structures in place to have monitoring and oversight function. The Dangote Refinery has said that the first task is to understand the Nigerian consumption profile. He said for the first time we are going to know exactly what is the true consumption of the average, of Nigeria. That's the first thing that we need to really establish in our economy. And then the second thing is there a way to track all the trucks? So mandatorily, that all the trucks that are uplifting as part of the uplift deal from the Dangote Refinery have a tracker. And that tracker is constantly tracked by the NMDPRA. These are things that we could do. For example, in the oil and gas sector, we have our vessels tracked. Every vessel that is lifting crude has a tracker, and we can tell the trail of where the vessels are going and what they're doing. We can even tell where they're getting off inventory. Because if the inventories are coming down, we can tell the percentage of inventory in that vehicle and where it sent out that inventory. We can do this as part of the deal. This is where we begin to take the thing from a law or regulation and begin to write rules and guidelines to guide every scenario. And this is a very high potential and high consequence scenario that you're talking about. This is something that we can tackle this way.
All right, Dr. Enang, you've talked about diversifying the energy sources, and you've also touched a little bit on, of course, the issue of security of installations from vandalism and all of that. Now, if we could go delve a little bit into security of installations and all of that, what would you say are those specific steps that must be taken in ensuring that persons who are complacent in sabotaging oil sector are brought to book? Because as long as there's corruption in the system, we really cannot make headway except it is properly addressed. Or wouldn't you agree?
Thank you very much, Savio. For me, I think one key buzzword comes to mind, and that's the PDRR method. P for predict, D for detect, R for response, R for recover. Now, the predict simply means we bring in technology that tells us in the field when we are going to have sort of interference with the oil and gas installations. Whether the installations is going to be, whether the interference is part of just nature, maybe something has happened there in the field, or part of the process offset, or part of a human disruption, that predict is what we should be able to tell. The detection is where that is all sent, correlated, and sent as a signal. So when you have all these signals that is predicted, you now detect, okay, what sort of signal? Is it a human intervention, interference, or is it just part of the process offset? You contextualize it at the detect phase. The response and the recover is where there's a human interface that interprets the signal and responds as required. Now, the response and the recover is what you're talking about. You're asking yourself, what are the imperatives to make sure that when we take action, that people do not, there's a deterrent. And it all starts with our legal process. When we start, and it's also starts with the way we handle it. I recommend the name and shaming of people that are involved in this thing. So long as we do not name and shame these people, they will continue. So long as there's always a legal loophole that these guys can explore and get away, then of course it's going to frustrate the people that are trying to prosecute them, because they put their lives at risk, prosecute them, and nothing comes out of it. So, I mean, the response and recover is where you send the signals to the human beings. When you look at the predict and the detect, at that point, you're dealing with the machine interface. At the response and recover, you're looking at how do we do a corrective measure and how do we also do a preventive measure so that people do not have the encouragement to carry on in these activities. And that is name and shame, and making sure we reform our legal system, making sure there's an expedited, and I think we should be escalating the crime of destroying oil and gas installations or installations of government to the level of kind of treason. It should be treated with such level of reactions so that people would know that there's a strong indication against all of these behaviors.
Okay, well, now, still on the issue of the marketers, this will bring about some level of competition. Does this also mean that it will force down the price of petrol or PMS in the market? Because when we have different marketers trooping into purchase, at least there should be some level of competition. But the question still remains, if that will force down the price of petrol, just as we await the impact of the crude to Naira deal.
All right, thank you very much. Sadly, it will not, and I'll explain to you why. So let's look at typical, I mean, we might not all be economic experts, but let's look at our demand and supply curve. And you know that supply is sort of constant because it's whatever the Dangote Refinery gives out at the moment. That is the basis. So the supply curve has been sorted. The demand curve is not, remember, the demand curve is not shifting because the marketers are coming directly to the Dangote Refinery. After all, the marketers are only coming to put out the demand requests for the various filling stations, which is a direct reflection of Nigerians' demand requests. So it doesn't change anything. That curve is not changing. It just means that rather than one person going, multiple people are going. In fact, if you do not handle it properly, so once the demand curve has not changed, the supply curve has not changed, the equilibrium price remains the same. And I'm going to tell you why it could work against us. If you do not handle this properly, I'll tell you what's going to happen. You have moved from a monopsony deal to a monopoly deal. Monopsony, where one person buys all of the products, is able to benchmark those prices against the imported alternative. Is also able to negotiate because it's buying in volumes and then pass that on to suppliers. That's one, you can get a better deal because of economies of scale. You're buying so much for the whole country. That's on one part. If you now move to a market structure where there is monopoly, the Dangote Refinery is the only supplier in this pool. What then happens? The suppliers, let's say supplier A, supplier B, and supplier C are bidding for supply in the southwest region, for example. And then supplier A says, look, I'm going to offtake at 1,210. I have people that I can sell to, and they have customers that will still buy. No problem. Customer B says, well, if you give me this quota, I am going to offtake at 1,215. I still have people to buy. Customer C says, give me at 1,250. I still have people to buy. Same region. It is very, very normal for the Dangote Refinery to look at allocating the Southwest region to the supplier that would give the biggest reach to him. Tendency to do that would mean you will end up allotting, because remember, the quantity is finite, and so people are trying to bid for that quantity and to get the right of first refusal for that supply. When they bid, it's bound to choose those, that's the monopoly market, is bound to choose those that are bidding the highest. What does that mean? When you are paying, normally, it should have sold for 1,200 on a normal basis, but you are paying 1,270, for example, in the Southwest, not because that is the price, but that is the opportunity cost of that deal. That's what you're paying for. So if we're not careful, the opportunity cost of the deal itself will be paid for by Nigerians, and that will increase the per liter price in the various parts of the country if we are not careful with this particular monopoly approach.
So in the coming days, Dr. Enang, it is really going to be interesting to see how this price regulations would definitely come to play in. But then, what would be your candid opinion as we begin to wind down this conversation as regards the right foot forward in ensuring that we address the many upheavals within the oil sector in Nigeria and restore a certain level of stability within the market?
Thank you very much. I think first and foremost, everybody needs to do their work. Obviously, we are moving to what the PIA says, a free market system. That's fantastic. I see a lot of benefits with the crude for Naira deal. We should, maximize the potential of that deal and make sure that it comes to fruition. Of course, NNPCL should focus on supplying that. It will be sad to hear on one particular month that the Dangote Refinery had to go back and import. Remember that right now, the price up in the conflict between Israel, Lebanon, and Iran. So that's going up. So it's the best time to begin to use our domestic supplies. And also, I'm hoping that the NMDPRA will come out with a bidding guideline that would check the excesses of a monopolistic system. So the bidding guideline will sort of give some margins of bidding so that we don't have a very great arbitrary, kind of window between the bids from the various off-takers. Otherwise, as I said, you and I will be paying for the opportunity cost of the deal rather than the real price of the commodity.
Dr. Wisdom Enang, Senior Energy Consultant and Analyst, thank you very much for always giving us your ideas on the program. We really appreciate it for always giving us the meat, making our heads spin with all these
oil and gas
the technical words that you use.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
All right, thank you.
All right, thank you so much. And we do hope some other time you can also join us on the program.